I could use my iPhone right now, scan this room, and have a digital twin that we could be sitting in virtually if we had our headsets on and having this conversation, but all three of us would be in different parts of this world and not sitting here in this room. And you can then blend that with, now you've got an instructor in the room and you've got a virtual piece of equipment and they're all looking at it together and they're talking about it. They're taking out their multimeters and they're testing, and the students are all over the world and the instructor is in one location.
For your own safety, you are reminded to stand behind the yellow line.
Welcome to Safety Factor. My name is Ben Hanks, and today we're talking about new technologies advancing industrial training. I'm joined by Adam Franz, Regional Sales Manager from Mazzella, as well as Andrew Kauser, Chief Product Officer and SVP of Simulated and Online Learning from ITI Industrial Training International. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Pleasure to be here.
So, how are virtual reality and augmented reality being used to improve industrial training for safety purposes?
So ITI is in the crane and rigging business, and we've been conducting programs really for the last 36 years. It's all about making people safe and productive in work. What we're finding is 90% of crane operation accidents are still human error related. Many, unfortunately, cause fatalities. And VR crane simulation, VR operator simulation is really allowing us to take those operators, put them in an environment where they can learn how to operate the equipment, but in a safe way, and also experience what it's like to operate cranes in all different environments with hazards, yet do so in a way that's not going to put them in harm, and at the same time improve their muscle memory and ultimately with their work in the job in a safe way. So that's really what I find is fascinating about the industry. AR and simulation is really starting to take that experiential learning and make it such that somebody can be equipped with tools before they get into the real world to do work.
So do you feel like this is more geared towards the younger generation, or do you find anybody is adapting to this?
You know, it's interesting. I think that certainly the young generation is more adept to experiencing training and learning in a different modality, and VR is a natural fit for them. It's more like a game. But and you do see resistance with the older generation saying, no, I've operated a crane for 30 years. I'll never sit on that. It doesn't make sense. As soon as they put the headset on and are immersed in the environment, you begin to see them really operate and behave as though they're in the actual crane. And there's a bit of a light bulb switch that goes on because they realize that actually training in this way can be very immersive. It eliminates all the distraction of, other things going on and allows for repetition on lifts and activities that allow you to perfect the job that you would normally do. And you might not have that opportunity on the real piece of equipment because it's in use. So we're finding that although it's much faster and easier for the young generation, the older generation is taking to it as well. Yeah.
So what's the experience like? What's it like being in the simulator?
You really can't do it justice by watching somebody on a screen using VR. You have to put on the headset and engage. And the reason I say that is we're sitting here and you can hear noise, you can hear other things going on while we're conducting this discussion. When you put on a headset, the current environment drops away. You're now in your 3D world, and that world includes sound and it includes some tactile feedback. And suddenly you forget where you are and you think you're in this new environment. And that to me is what's real about that training modality, is it puts you in a place where you get to experience what it's like being 300 feet up on a wind farm or being in a tower crane looking down. I mean, it actually weeds people out of jobs sometimes because they realize, no, I've got a fear of heights. This is not for me. So.
Yeah, and I would say, going to Washington to ITI's headquarters, was able to operate with the overhead crane simulator as well as the RT simulator to go get hands-on and understand it. So I've operated some cranes before, overhead cranes, just, after sale and commissioning of them, but then got to, grab the joysticks and operate it and run through it and immerse yourself in that. It was a very real feel. And the slack control or the sway of the hoist and trolley, it was very spot on to feathering how the drives work amongst the cranes. And it was a very, very real feel. I reflect on that, and it was a really, really interesting experience. I know that there are some industry leaders that train their folks and staff and people in certain segments that are utilizing these simulators to bring their new hires on board, right? Everybody needs people. We need to fill, all the baby boomers that are retiring. And I believe that simulators are the next step to engage folks, right? They're cool, they're understanding, but it also gets people in the door and gets them on the sticks to really understand what they're going to get themselves into or not. So it helps really qualify them out somewhat to see if they want to go to that next level. Is that what you see, Andrew?
Yeah, no, I see that for sure. And in some instances, some of our customers are taking these simulators to schools and getting the young folks that may not be destined for your four-year university to actually spend a little time in the crane sim and realize that, wow, this is interesting. I might want to do this as a career or as a vocation. And it gives that exposure to somebody that otherwise it would be hard to get them exposed to.
Right. We could put you in a simulator of an RT or a crawler crane, but we're not going to give you the sticks to a $5 or $6 million piece of equipment to go run. So it gives them that experience, and they may gravitate towards it. There's a lot of opportunities for the youth to definitely become engaged and involved in those. And I think that's what's really exciting with partnering with ITI and being that thought leader in that space. And that's really going to help drive our industry, as we need that youth influx to take over and really set us up for success.
Right. And that's where simulation, I think, is an interesting avenue to get those younger folks coming out of high school or looking for a vocation. They can take this program. It doesn't have to be just an operator. It could be an inspector. It could be a technician. You can learn how to do a job in a simulated way before you actually have to put your hands on the equipment. I'm not saying that you never do. And as part of your learning path, certainly real world experience is involved, but simulation can get you pretty far down the road in terms of muscle memory, tool selection, the right procedures to follow before you even get in front of the actual piece of equipment.
You look at a lot of our customers that are crane rental firms or large construction firms. A lot of these folks, you start as the oiler first before you become the crane operator. Right. Then you kind of got your grooming before you can get in the seat. Well, you go a few layers back from that, they're generally the family member. Their uncle worked there or their father worked there, and that's what got them into that trade. Well, now this opens it up where you have a lot of other folks that have opportunities because of it. And that's what's really exciting about what the simulators can do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So how does it compare to real world training on the actual machine?
So there've been actually a number of studies. Everybody's kind of investigating this. And, our crane sim has done, we were supported by the NCCO Foundation to do a study with them. Basically, they did the study. They used our simulators. And comparing basically a virtual crane sim NCCO practical exam to the real life and having the individuals go through both, we were 95% accurate on the simulator, being able to predict whether somebody could pass or fail the real world example. And that was pretty telling. And that was just out of the box simulator, right? Without any fine tuning. Had we spent time to really fine tune that, we could probably get close to 100%. So very similar. Now, in terms of efficacy, what we find in studying it is it's probably an even balance between instructor-led training and simulation right now. You basically get the same capability in both areas. But what some studies have shown is that somebody who spends time in simulation and builds that muscle memory and his experiences situations that they may not experience on a real life crane will perform 2 3/4 times more likely to perform or react to a situation that otherwise they won't react to in real life.
Do you have any examples of that, like what they might be experiencing?
So, and it doesn't have to be crane sim. Let's talk about fall protection or blood-borne pathogens or AED, right? So if I've gone through a course and learning how to use an AED on somebody who's fallen and needs to be revived, typically in a training session, I might get exposure to the machine and learn how to use it. But there are probably 10 other people in that class, and my hands on the equipment is fairly limited, right? We can simulate that exact same activity, and you can actually be involved in making sure that, you apply the machine properly, you turn it on and revive the person or whatever. That kind of example, and it has been studied, anybody who's been through that and through simulation is 2 3/4 times more likely to act in a real world situation than somebody who's just learned it in a class and may have had their hands on it, but didn't really spend a lot of time doing it.
So I guess that's one way that companies are ensuring that operators and riggers have been trained using the technology are actually prepared for real world scenarios. Are there any certifications or tests that they have to take that kind of graduate them into using a real crane?
Well, certainly there are certification bodies out there, and NCCO being one of them. And a lot of our crane operators would want that certification. We can prepare them. We can give them practice within the real world, the simulated world, a prep of going through the CCO exam, a Z corridor with tennis balls on the poles, and they can practice that, which will prepare them for going and sitting on the real crane and doing that work now and taking that certification. So we can't certify them in the sim right now, but we can certainly get them down the road of being much more capable when they do sit on that real piece of equipment.
So I'll speak from an overhead crane perspective, right? So there is no certification required for an overhead crane. So these overhead crane simulators are the folks are using these at their facilities to make people aware of how they work, how the joystick's laid out, and then you can mirror that to that simulation. Then you can literally go put them in that cab of that crane, right? There's no certification, but that would be the employer that's deeming that you're then qualified to operate their equipment.
Right.
So you could utilize that as maybe a piece, right? Not 100% saying that the simulator says that you're a great crane operator, but it could be a percentage, a portion of understanding if someone's ready to go run that 40-ton overhead crane in that process environment. So
no, absolutely. And kind of to dovetail on that, the traditional way of learning is to possibly carve out some time where you're training on that live machine in a live environment.
That's right.
And it's creating some safety concerns and issues and whatnot. So instead, you can do that training in a simulated way and have the operator experience things that they're not going to experience in the real world. You can have the hydraulics fail or the load slip or issues come up that you wouldn't want to test them on in the real world.
That's right. And those companies that are willing to invest in these simulators and these creative solutions to get training, these are process equipment facilities. These are cranes that are running 24/7.
Right.
So you think of getting a simulator or a lease or something like that. The total cost of ownership isn't taking away from that downtime in the shipping bay or the melt shop crane, and I'm speaking specifically to a steel mill, but possibly at a paper mill, right? You got a wet end and a dry end crane. You're not waiting to have the down day or downtime to possibly go train that new person. You're able to get them 90% of the way there before you put them in the cab and then give them that blessing, right? That, okay, we believe that you are qualified now to operate our overhead crane.
Absolutely.
And that builds that bench of talent as well.
Yeah, Absolutely. And that's the way a lot of our customers are using it right now. They're using it as that program to get new hires up to speed, essentially.
So I guess that leads me to my next question, which is how is this going to help improve accessibility to training? Like you mentioned, you can go into schools now and train people on cranes before they're out of high school.
Right.
So what are some other ways that this is going to just make it easier to access training?
The crane sims that we offer are fairly high fidelity and typically require hardware. So they're not the point where you can just have the headset and use your joysticks, because they're not going to give you that real world feel of operating a crane or holding a belly box. We have gone down the road of now virtualizing a pendant. So we have a pendant controlled overhead crane, and it's a virtual pendant. So all you need is the headset and the paddles. So it's beginning to get to the point where it is more accessible and therefore could be available to a broader market like schools and whatnot, which don't require the hardware.
So I guess we didn't really talk about that. So it's not really just you put on a headset and you've got a video game controller. Like you're putting on a headset and you're actually in the cab holding a joystick, or you've got the belly box.
Right. So it's married with technology or hardware that is very representative of the OEM controls. And that's important because you don't want them learning how to simulate a crane with a joystick or, a Game Boy. They actually have to physically use the controls. So we actually use OEM parts from our manufacturers or belly boxes and marry that with the simulation. So it gives them that real world experience. And it's an important part of it.
So part of that simulation, I remember when I was in Washington, you talk about that feel. You sit in the mobile crane one, you look down and you look up to the load, and you're seeing it, you're feeling it move. And I've sat in other mobile pieces of equipment and it truly feels that way. So that speaks really to that muscle memory or repetition of what they're doing. So it's not just a video game per se. This is a very,
we call them serious games.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, our developers are gamers. They build games for a living, but they do it in a serious way. So all these simulations that we build. So take a specific crane, an overhead crane. We have about 250 scenarios within that, and they're game-like. Every one of those scenarios is, run this, pick up the load, move it here, drop it down, and they get harder and more complex, and they're blind and whatnot. But each one of them is like a game. You get 5 stars at the end, or you get graded on your process, and ultimately that turns into a learning plan or a path, and so you don't feel like you're being just through rote training. You're actually going through a really enjoyable experience at the end of the day, and a game-like environment, but much more serious because it's real world.
I was over there earlier today and I was watching people play around in the Sims, and I thought it was interesting how it also it tells you what you're doing wrong as you're doing it. So it's not like you pick it up and you're like, what happened?
Yes.
It's telling you like, you're not centered, you're not.
Right. And we'll remediate at the end of every one of those scenarios and kind of give you an indication of what you did wrong. And some things I'm not a crane operator, so I've never really, I'll get in it and do stuff and realize, oh, wait a second, you're right. I did fly the load over an individual. That's not a good thing, I guess. And then they deducted points for it, or they stopped the scenario and I had to start again.
Or I was to run it down the path or the aisleway and then shift it over because there was something there. I mean, and then they grade you for that, or you have to stop it in an area and minimize that load swing and then set it down in a certain area.
Right.
That's where it's very, it's very realistic.
Yeah.
So how do you see technology in general just impacting the workforce and addressing fatalities, injuries, things like that?
So it's been interesting, and I have this kind of pre-COVID mindset and this post-COVID mindset. And before COVID, you still had a lot of resistance to technology. You had people basically, and the older generation saying, "I'll never learn in this way." And it was amazing to see that switch when suddenly we're locked down and people need to learn, but they don't. The only way you can do it is virtually. And if you think about it, and there's studies, again, you look at, and my mother, who's 85 years old, suddenly learned how to order food online or, have calls with their grandchildren virtually and all this stuff that they would never have done before. And the same thing happened with training. So a lot of resistance that was there for technology coming into the training world has really dropped away, and people are adopting it much quicker. So I think there's this healthy interest now in looking at, well, how can this technology help us improve our training? We're not suggesting that instructor-led training is going away or shouldn't happen. It should, but there are elements of it that can be supported by and improved upon with simulation. And it actually lessens the load on an instructor because they can have their individuals go through these activities and have the computer consistently kind of mark and grade them and tell them what they did wrong and get them to practice again without tying up that instructor where they can focus on other areas.
Yeah, to comment, I mean, it was that during COVID forced adoption, right?
Right.
If you wanted to communicate with your family, you're going to use a Zoom call, the free Zoom license for 30 minutes, or a Teams call, or FaceTime, and all these other apps. And I think that's really progressed technology from a learning perspective as well, right? There's learning management systems, right? It was always instructor-led training. Well, now there's so many other medias in which to achieve that training. And that's what makes it super exciting being tied. I mean, simulators are the really cool one, right? But there's always like a learning management system and test and retest and understand. And then it's a total cost of ownership, but it could also reduce on some costs as well if you do it the correct way, right? An accident or an injury is exponential.
Right. And a lot of our programs are just that. We're not trying to say one system is the be all end all for training. So a proper learning plan would probably include some instructor-led training, a lot of e-learning, some simulator time, and ultimately qualification on the equipment or time on the, real world.
It'd be a basket of a learning journey, right?
Yes.
It's not just, I'm going to get training done and I'm done. No, it creates a pathway of reinforced learning through a learning journey.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are some industries that you're seeing starting to implement this or be more accepting of it?
We're pretty broadly positioned across all industries. We've had a lot of success in steel. As you mentioned, I mean, you're in production environments where you can't utilize the crane for training, and they still need to onboard and find new good operators. So any industries where there's safety concerns, high demand for talent, and equipment scarcity is probably the opportunity we have.
There's segments that, really value the culture of training. It's not just you walk in the wall and on the lobby, it's, we promote safety. No. If you're going down a learning journey of safety, you embody safety as a part of your core value. And I think that's where, you see those in a lot of different pockets or areas. And if they truly, that's where they have to walk the talk of that they're a safety-based culture and understanding. So I can think of places that have simulators or I've seen or truly invest in their training, right? I mean, ASME B30 states you must be qualified. Well, how are you going to be qualified? Well, what are you doing to qualify that employee? And there's people that embody that safety culture to ensure that they put their team members on a learning journey to achieve that. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do you envision the future classroom, like maybe 10 years from now?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I've had the luxury of being able to see and advise some really interesting technology, especially around simulation and utilizing technology to deliver training. So there are opportunities, even on the instructor-led training side. I guess what I see is some of the barriers to scale, even for an instructor-led training organization, is the number of instructors you have, distance, getting individuals into a classroom, travel, all that stuff. Technology can solve a lot of that these days. And simulation can as well, because now you can put people in environments and I could use my iPhone right now, scan this room and have a digital twin that we could be sitting in virtually if we had our headsets on. and having this conversation, but all three of us would be in different parts of this world and not sitting here in this room. And you can then blend that with, now you've got an instructor in the room and you've got a virtual piece of equipment and they're all looking at it together and they're talking about it. They're taking out their multimeters and they're testing, and the students are all over the world and the instructor is in one location.
I think it's going to be the environment in 10 years of continue to do more with less.
Yeah.
The scarce resource is people and expertise.
Right.
So do more with less means more technology. That means more automation. That means
Right.
more training, right? Got to be able to do more with less. And that's ultimately your business efficiencies that you're building. And that's where using a training and a learning journey like this would definitely support that, right? Your limited resource is that in-person trainer. Well, that person doesn't have to be on a plane coming to see you.
Right.
You've got that now right there to utilize that technology to train.
Absolutely.
So that's where I see that, where it's going in the next 10 years from that perspective.
How do you see technology being used to address the skills gap that we have right now?
One of the things we're finding is that companies are realizing, not realizing, they know there's a massive skills gap and they have issues, and their issues to growth are not having enough people in the right roles doing the jobs. So you have to onboard them, you got to do it efficiently. So there are organizations out there that are very good at finding and sourcing talent from the standpoint of these guys have the right, and gals have the right capabilities, but now they've got to be trained. And companies have realized that the way to get them trained has changed. And it's not just bring everybody into one place and do it in the classroom. There's a path to learning that you can create where you are providing some virtual instruction. You might even have an instructor using a Zoom-like capability to do some mentoring and some facilitation, but having them separately go out and do some OJT, and then bring them into a location at some point and do some type of hands-on capstone events, but simulation and can be weaved in throughout that entire process. So it's really a journey of trying to take, this program where we used to take 6 months to get somebody up to speed, you can shorten it by getting them through using technology to a much faster place than you otherwise would.
Right. You're shortening that time from them coming in fresh to being a productive employee.
Yeah.
Providing, the results that everyone's looking for, essentially.
Yeah. And a lot of organizations right now are really looking at that, because that's really the barrier to growth right now is having the right skilled workers, especially with the number of retirements and everything else coming at them.
And employee turnover, right?
Yeah.
You got to be able to get those folks up and running as quick as possible. So time is money on these construction sites as well as manufacturing. So you've got to be able to shorten that time frame and get them up and running. And that's where the learning journey and simulators, I think that's going to continue to shrink that gap.
Right. Absolutely.
What are companies doing then to address the cost of industrial training? Like, it's still pretty new. I have to assume it's not cheap.
So it's actually the cost of simulation is, as I mentioned before, from a technology standpoint, it's getting more efficient. The price point on headsets, the price point on actually development is coming down pretty significantly. So PwC did an analysis, and they're showing that in parity with instructor-led training, you need to get about 375 students trained in simulation. So from a cost point, you're even with instructor-led training at about 375 students. You're even with e-learning at about 2,000 students. So it's really not as expensive anymore as it used to be. The real barrier is getting the technology into the field and having it managed by the end customer. And there's still some clunkiness around that needs to be resolved to a certain extent. We're facilitating that by just offering it as a bundle as part of our solution. But many customers try and figure out, how many headsets am I going to have? Where are they going to be warehoused? Who's going to manage them? All that type of stuff. And that can be some of the barrier for sure.
And you understand the equipment that we're talking about here, right? These are serious pieces of equipment that they are simulating or working with. And I think that from a cost perspective, if you go have 10 brand new cranes in your fleet, and you dump a crane because you have the incorrect training, I mean, that's paid for how many simulators? So
Right.
we don't want to look at it from a cost of. It's got to be looked at from like a 10,000 foot view of, okay, where are my opportunities? Because I have a fleet that's worth $500 million. Well, okay, to
Right.
ensure the success of our organization. That's where you see a lot of people are on board already.
Yeah.
Those people that really look at it from a 10,000 foot view. It's not, this one simulator is going to cost me X, right? It's
Right.
how many people can they put through that program and integrate that into their training culture?
Right. We're working with companies right now that have very large construction, programs, and they're erecting, a half dozen cranes, and the cost of that in comparison to a piece of hardware for a simulation is nothing, right?
Thanks, guys, for joining us. So, Andrew, how can people get a hold of you?
So best way is really go to our website, www.iti.com. It's that simple.
Okay, be sure to visit ITI.com. And as always, you can get a hold of me, Adam, or any of our other experts at MazzellaCompanies.com. Don't forget to pop into our Learning Center. We have a ton of information there. You can subscribe to Safety Factor wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also check it out on the Lifting and Rigging channel on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.